Jesus Christ, the only Savior of Almighty God, stated in Matthew chapter 24, verse 32 to 34, and I'm going to quote from the New International Version. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. So Jesus wants us to learn something. He does not want us to be in ignorance. He says as soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. I think that's logical. He used a logical example for us for a very, very appropriate understanding of the end of the age. He said, even so, just like these little twigs, when they get tender and they start popping out, you know summer is nigh. When you see all these things, and this is the end-time prophetic events of Matthew chapter 24, he said, you know that it is near, right at the door. And he says, I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass until all these things have happened. Brethren, during those prophetic events, it shows there is coming a rise of a world government. The book of Revelation runs hand in hand with Matthew chapter 24. And it shows that at the end of all these events that are prophesied, Jesus Christ will return, and your salvation is growing nearer every day that passes. But what are some of these things that he's talking about here? In Revelation chapter 17, or chapter 13, verse 1, I'll quote from the New International Version. And I saw a beast. The beast is a government, and it also represents the head of that government, coming out of the sea. And when you look at Revelation 17, verse 15, it identifies the waters and the sea as that of humanity. So here is a beast that's going to rise out of all the nations of the earth simultaneously. That's going to work in every nation, subverting them for the overthrow for a one-world government. And notice what it says. He had 10 horns. I'll stop there again. In Revelation 17:12, it identifies these 10 horns as 10 kings who are going to rule over a kingdom. So 10 kings ruling over 10 kingdoms. And it said 7 heads with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. So it's going to be a world system which is not going to accept Jesus Christ of Nazareth. It's going to be a blasphemous system. It'll try to destroy everyone who participates in Christianity. In chapter 7, verse 7 of the same chapter, it says that this kingdom will overcome the saints. Now, also in Revelation 17, it identifies just a little further, verse 12 through 14, the first line. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings. Notice what the New International says, along with the beast. So there is coming 10 kingdoms. The world is going to be divided up into 10 global networks of kingdoms, and they're all going to give their power and authority to the beast. Notice what it says in the New International. They have one purpose for all 10 of these kingdoms, and will give their power and authority to the beast. They'll make war with the Lamb. That's Jesus, according to John 1:29. So this identifies when this system is going to rise at the very end of the age, when Jesus is going to return, and this 10 global networks of kingdoms with a beast ruling over it, the great world dictator, will fight Jesus Christ. A world government is rising, which will be composed of 10 global groupings of nations. I refer you to our Newswatch magazine of March-April 1984, entitled 10 Kingdoms Along with the Beast, for the proof of what they already have planned for this end-time kingdom. It's prophesied that a very unholy alliance between the political structure of this world and the religious structure will cause this world government. Now, in Revelation 17, verse 1 to 6, I'm going to only mention certain phrases in those scriptures. Come, I'll show you the punishment of the great prostitute. In the King James Version it says whore, talking about a great church that has fallen away from Jesus Christ. And it says who sits on many waters. So that means this church is going to be ruling over nations. With her the kings of the earth have committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated or made drunk, as the King James Version says, with the wine of her adulteries, false doctrines, and their dealings with the nations of the earth. And it says, I saw a woman, that's this great church, sitting on a scarlet, which is red, beast, which is a government. So here is an alliance of a great false church with a rising world government empire at the end of the age that'll make war with Jesus Christ. And he says that this beast was covered with blasphemous names. That means this religious organization also will be against Jesus Christ, but it will put out an appearance of religiosity, but then it will undermine all religion because it's working hand in glove with this blasphemous government. And it identifies that this religious organization is working with this governmental organization by, it says it had 7 heads and 10 horns, just like Revelation 13:1. It also says the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet. This is queenly garments. And when you read in Isaiah about this Babylonian system, it says she sits a queen and says, I'll never be a widow. She's going to last forever. That's what she thinks. And was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls, showing that this religious system is a very wealthy system. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. This title was written upon her forehead. Listen to this. Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. So this religious system has nothing to do with the truth of God in the Bible. This system has tried to stamp out the truth and install in its place paganism, traditions of men to enslave humanity to the rudiments of this world. I'll continue the quote or conclude it. I saw that the woman, this great false church, was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony of Jesus. Revelation 17:1-6. So here is the prophesied setting for the end of the age, for the rise of this red government, assisted by a religious organization, and they will literally fight the Lamb, Jesus Christ, at His return. Central America today is a powder keg. And I think we need to understand that. So the title of the sermon today is The Truth About Central America. And I think you need to know it as those who are watching for world events for Jesus Christ to return. A very amazing phenomenon is taking place right now in Central America. The consequences of what's taking place, I don't believe, can be unestimated. The damage that it's going to do to the United States of America. And I don't believe that it can be fully understood as yet either, because the repercussions have not begun to happen fully. One of our ministers, Mr. Dick Schuda in San Diego, California, said that the border in southwest United States was out of control. Thousands upon thousands of illegal aliens are pouring across the borders and going on up into California, New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, and so on. A woman by the name of Phoebe Courtney, who has kept up with the spread of international communism since the 1950s, wrote an article entitled Illegal Aliens Invade the United States. And this was published in February of 1986, and it made some interesting facts, and I'd like to give just a few of those as we go along. She stated that if a foreign nation were to send several millions of people in uniforms across our borders, we would call it an invasion, and would mobilize our forces, our military forces, to stop them. And yet one of the basic necessities and rights of a sovereign nation is to make its own borders secure. But the United States is being invaded right now by millions of people, and we're not even repelling these invaders at all. And the reason that we're not more concerned is that these particular invaders do not wear uniforms and do not bear arms. And yet, this invasion is real. They're illegal immigrants from South America, Central America, and Mexico. How many? Nobody really knows. But there are millions upon millions of them coming in. Massive immigration occurred a century ago, but all of those people that came into the United States had proper visas. They were legal immigrants coming into this country. But today, every American taxpayer had better understand what is about to happen to them because of this massive influx of illegal aliens that are coming into the southwest part of the United States. Now, I want to give just a little information about this. On September 19th, 1985, the Senate of the United States voted to approve this particular act, the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1985. It's the Senate number 1200, and there was a vote of 69 to 30 for this act. Now, the bill is a deliberate misnomer. It's named to deliberately deceive because it provides neither reform nor control of our border problem in the southwest United States. And this bill, because the Senate would grant amnesty to all illegal aliens who can prove they've been in this country since January 1st of 1980. Amnesty, and just give them citizenships without even proper constitutional qualifications for it. And the House bill, H.R. number 3080, would also grant amnesty to undocumented aliens who can prove they've been here since January 1st, 1982, which is even a lesser period of time. The only differences, really, between the Senate bill and the House bill is the matter of the time period is when they're going to allow these illegal aliens and how long they've been in the country and to provide them with amnesty. Mr. Meldrum Thompson, who was the former governor of New Hampshire, had this to say in the November 1985 issue of Conservative Digest, quote, "Amnesty on a grand scale contemplated by the Simpson Bill, Senate number 1200, could result in as many as 15 to 48 millions of persons eventually becoming residents of the United States. Most, and get this, this is very important, would be poor, uneducated, unskilled, and even culturally hostile to our values and traditions." End of quote. I think that's very important because the last bastion of freedom is the United States of America. And if it is destroyed internally, there goes the world. The Senate and House are trying right now to compromise on their dates for allowing this amnesty for illegal aliens. But that's not the point. The point is that if you advertise to the world that you can break laws in the United States of America and we'll just pass a law saying, okay, lawbreakers, it's okay, we won't call you a criminal, then the rest of the world is going to try to flood into our borders also, hoping they will receive amnesty also. Here's how Mr. Loeb, who was a publisher of the Manchester, New Hampshire Union Leader, put it, quote, "The worst aspect of the proposed immigration reform bill is that it basically is immoral. It discriminates against those newer citizens who have properly immigrated to this country. It rewards those who break the law. It sends a signal that if wrong is not controlled, it can be made right by simply changing the law. Just like the one that says you cannot commit adultery, which means all forms of sexual activity. So they just change a law making it wrong to discriminate against homosexuality. So they try to legalize homosexuality by just changing the law. Well, God's law doesn't change. And this law would be a terrible thing if enacted in the United States. I'll continue his quote. "Law-breaking, either by those who come across the border or those who welcome them as tools for financial gain, that's big business with cheap labor, must be called just what it is, law-breaking. And it must be dealt with properly." End of quote. I'll give you another quote from the Chattanooga News Free Press concerning amnesty. Quote, "Doing this would advertise that breaking American laws pay off. It would not stop illegal immigration, but it would encourage it. Giving a free ticket to millions who are now here illegally would prompt millions more to come with the expectation that they too would later get amnesty." Now, how is this going to affect us? how is all of this going to affect the United States population? Nobody really can agree upon the number of illegal aliens in the United States. It's estimated that it's anywhere between 4 and 20 million from Mexico alone. And here's the key. American taxpayers are footing the bill for all of their welfare, their hospitalization when they have children, and I'm going to give you some of the quotes from that. And in the article I mentioned before from the Conservative Digest, Governor Thompson, here's what he said, quote, "One thing is certain. The number crossing our borders illegally has grown to torrential proportions. It's estimated by some immigration and naturalization officials that as many as 2 million illegal aliens enter our country each year. About 90% of those apprehended by our Border Patrol are Mexicans. But that is because most of our patrol officers are spread along our 2,000 miles southern border. To be exact, I've got figures put out by our Border Patrol showing that they only average one person per mile. Now that person can't see an entire mile across our southern border. To be exact, there is only 1/3 the number of people in our Border Patrol as there is number of policemen in New York City trying to patrol 2,000 miles of border. About 60% of all those illegal aliens that come into this country are from Mexico. However, large numbers do come in from Central America, such as Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, Ecuador, the Philippines, South Korea, and India. Those are the main ones that come into this country. They all come in from countries which are overpopulated and economically depressed, so they can't find jobs and they live in filth and squalor. So they're coming here with a hope of receiving employment and raising their standard of living. But this invasion of the United States by illegal aliens will increase if the communists continue to overtake Central American countries and the United States doesn't stop it soon. Now, here's what Mr. Harold Ezell, E-Z-E-L-L, who was the Western Regional Commissioner of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, has pointed out concerning problems that accompany this illegal aliens. They say that there has been a rise in diseases, particularly tuberculosis, which has thought to be eradicated in the United States. They would only come up with maybe 1 or 2 cases a year in the United States. And yet now there is a dramatic rise in tuberculosis. And it's coming from the illegal aliens who are pouring across our borders. So the millions of illegal aliens avoid any type of health screening tests when they come into this country. And vast numbers of Asiatic aliens are now being admitted into the United States with little or no health examinations at all. And they're coming in legally. Now, the health treatment to Americans is pointing out in a scientific paper, Incidence and Epidemiology of Tuberculosis in the 1980s. This was written by a Dr. Lawrence Farrar. Here's what he says. He's also a director of the Division of Tuberculosis Control Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Here's what he said, quote, "Large numbers of refugees, immigrants, and undocumented aliens have entered the United States from areas, primarily Asia and Latin America, where the rates of tuberculosis infection and diseases are among the highest in the world. And yet they're pouring into our country. Substantial numbers of Cubans and Haitians also have entered the United States. Get this. The incident rate of tuberculosis in Haitian immigrants and the Indo-Chinese refugees in 1980 was about 100 times that of the rest of the United States population. So now we can begin to see one of the threats to illegal aliens who have not been tested for different types of diseases. So now can we begin to see where the pale and the black horse of the apocalypse with disease epidemics could possibly come into play? A booklet that has been published by the American Immigration Control Foundation had this to say, and I quote, "The United States General Accounting Office reports aliens bring into our country contagious diseases like leprosy, tuberculosis, hepatitis, malaria, even venereal disease. Outbreaks of tuberculosis and typhoid in Southern California, Texas, and Arizona are traced to illegal aliens. End of quote. So the health danger to United States citizens is definitely on the rise. Why? Okay, because those who are coming into this country, first of all, take jobs as waiters, waitresses, dishwashers, busboys, cooks, and handlers of food in restaurants, because those are the jobs that Americans want the least. And those are the ones that they can secure the easiest. So they're handling our foods with all of these contagious diseases, and it's passed on to us. Because you see, if you pre-cook food, that's fine. It'll kill a lot of germs. But after the cooking is over and you start handling it with diseased bodies and hands, then you pass on the germs and they're not killed. This is what's been happening in Southern California, Texas, and the border region. Now, because of understaffing of our United States Border Patrol, our southern border is very porous at this time. There's holes in it allowing millions of illegal refugees to come into this country. They're also coming in are not those individuals who are just looking for better jobs from poverty-stricken countries. They're illegal aliens who carry arms and explosive weapons. Gordon J. McDonnell, Deputy Chief, he's now retired of the United States Border Patrol, made this statement, quote, "Our communist enemies like Fidel Castro can see how easily illegal aliens cross our borders. So they smuggle hundreds of spies and terrorists into America." End of quote. I want to read you a letter that we just received last week from Brownsville, Texas. Dear David Smith, please send me the 4 tapes on Babylon as writing the United States. I can assure you that when people listen to your tapes, they ask a lot of questions after. Something of interest. Here it is. The sheriff of Cameron County, Brownsville, Texas, tried to arrest a group of 18 illegal aliens as they came across the border. They were from Colombia. They had in their possession personal recognizance bonds signed by our federal judge, Mr. Vela, V-E-L-A. The Catholic Church is funding this, and with large amounts of money. End of quote. Very interesting. Coming into our country, and they're bringing in weapons all across our borders. The July 16th, 1984 United States and World Report, or United States News and World Report, quoted a Louis Goffreda, the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. This is the organization called FEMA, which can literally take over in case of an emergency and declare the United States a dictatorship. Martial law. Here's what he said, quote, "The United States is extremely vulnerable. Our highly interconnected infrastructure systems," and here's those infrastructure systems, the power supply networks, natural gas and petroleum pipelines, nuclear power plants, water supply systems, the telephone networks, and others contain choke points which cannot all be defended simultaneously against site attacks by highly motivated and well-armed terrorists. End of quote. The United States is vulnerable to terrorists. On June 24th, 1985, the Washington Times described a conference on terrorism that took place at that time. Quote, "The next wave of terrorist activity against the United States will likely be attacked on highly exposed domestic, that's internal, communications, power, and transportation networks." A Georgetown University expert on terrorism warned. End of quote. The United States is now the next target for world globalism, to destroy us so they can merge us into a one-world government. The Washington Times went on to reveal this, I quote, "Terrorists could use bombs or rocket-propelled grenades to blow up computers, pumping stations, large transformers, key bridges, and key waterway locks and dams, which is right up in Alton, Illinois, above St. Louis, almost all of which are unprotected. One system is dependent upon another. If the electricity goes out, then the pumping stations fail, and you can't get natural gas or water. End of quote. They can literally shut down the United States of America if we continue to allow these illegal aliens to come into this country, and many of them are communist agents for the overthrow of our government. Like any occupying army, illegal aliens are literally taking over American jobs. They're throwing United States citizens out of work and onto the streets. And I got a letter from one of our own church members who lives in Texas last week, said that they were about to be thrown out of their homes because of all the activities going on, and jobs were going to illegal aliens and they couldn't get work now. This is very serious. Professor Donald Huddle has been studying illegal aliens in the United States economy for years. Here is some of his conclusions. For every 100 working illegal aliens, they displace 65 American citizens from the workforce. Wonder why unemployment is staggering? Another one of our members outside of, I think it is Albuquerque, New Mexico, is having great difficulty in finding a job because of so many illegal aliens taking all of the work. Here's what Phyllis Schlafly from Alton, Illinois, stated in her syndicated column of December 5th, 1985. I quote, "In a world of increasing automation and technology combined with our high illiteracy rate, the last thing we need is a flood of unskilled labor." End of quote. And yet this is exactly what's taking place. Unskilled labor by the millions pouring into our country. But what is all this costing the American taxpayer? The figures are now out that the unemployed American receives an average of $7,000 a year in welfare and in unemployment benefits due directly to illegal aliens displacing them in the workplace. This means a total of $25 billion each year you and I as citizens pay in taxes to support unemployed people due directly to illegal aliens taking their jobs. There's a new book out called The Immigration Time Bomb by a Mr. Palmer Stacy and a Wayne Lutton, and they point out the following facts. Even though it's against the law, aliens do receive unemployment benefits and welfare. It's against our law, but they receive it anyway. To be exact, judges have now ordered in the courts payments to illegal aliens. Illegal aliens are cashing in on tax-supported medical services. In 1983 alone, illegal aliens represented 22.9% of the total patients and accounted for 64% of the births at 6 public hospitals in Los Angeles County in California. Nearly 80% of the babies born in one major Los Angeles County hospital are born to illegal alien mothers, in which taxpayer support is all of it. They never pay one dime for their own childbirth. And one of the large problems is due, or this problem is in particular is due because of liberal judges who have ruled that illegal aliens can go on welfare the moment they come in to this country and can't find work. And yet that is against the law. To be exact, it has been so bad that the state Supreme Court in Arizona ruled that taxpayers must pay all hospital costs for illegal aliens. And this is costing the state of Arizona $4.4 million a year. What if you and I were to be able to keep that money in our pocket instead of having to be taxed to support other people? We could retain the affluence that we had in this nation 20 years ago. But today we're supporting the rest of the world with our taxes. And I don't think it's fair at all. Anyway, the American Immigration Control Foundation, they put out a booklet, and it states, quote, "With easily forged papers, millions of illegal aliens get billions of dollars in welfare, food stamps, public housing, Social Security, and medical aid, paid by taxpayers like you and me. End of quote. And that's the American Immigration Control Foundation that's stating it. They don't even appreciate having their taxes going to pay for illegal aliens. Well, I think that'll be enough of that particular topic of the flood of illegal aliens. I just wanted to let you see it is a gigantic problem for the United States. What does this have to do with Bible prophecy? I think that illegal aliens pouring across the border of the United States could cost you and me our freedom. That's how serious it is to me. Because there has now been passed into law for a number of years, starting in 1962, what is called executive orders. This is the President of the United States. He would write in the National Registry an executive order. He would number it and state what it was going to be for. If the Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, didn't debate this and defeat it, within 10 days it became automatic law of the land. As a direct result, the number of executive orders today, if they went into effect, would create an absolute dictatorship. Now notice that Executive Order number 11,051, what it specifically states. In the case of increased international tension or economic or financial crisis, responsibilities of the Office of Emergency Planning, it would give them direct control over every aspect of the United States of America. And then it delineates. The Executive Order number 10,995, they would take over all communication media in the country, private or government control. They would take over all. 10,997 said they would take over all power, electric power, petroleum, gas, fuels, minerals. 10,998 said they would take over all food resources and farms. 10,999 said they'd take over all methods of transportation, highways, seaports. Executive Order 11,000 said they would take over the mobilization of civilians, that's you and me, and workforces under governmental supervision. 11,001, they would take over all health, welfare, and educational functions. 11,002, the Postmaster General, which is now a member of the President's Cabinet, will operate a nationwide registration of all persons, every person in the country. 11,003, they would take over all airports and aircraft, private or otherwise. 11,004, they would take over housing, finance authorities to relocate communities, to build new housing with public funds, designate areas to be abandoned as unsafe, and establish new locations for populations. Why is this important? Because in 1985, there was a booklet passed around for high school students in the state of Nebraska, and it had broken down in 9 sections the United States into their 9 new states. And they're all broken down according to ethics, or not ethics, I'm sorry, but your national origin, such as Mexican. The southwest part of the United States will be all Mexicans. Southern part of the United States will be for all black people, and it will actually be called Kush. And the United States will be broken up into 9 regions, and they're going to separate us according to your national origin. This is already in the planning and told to the students in the state of Nebraska. And this is how they're going to do it, through the executive orders, where they're going to relocate whole populations. You see, they are serious in what they're going to do. Executive Order number 11,005 states they'll take over all railroads, inland waterways, and public storage facilities. As a direct result of all the illegal aliens pouring into the United States, an article came out by a syndicated columnist, William Safire. It appeared in the Chicago Tribune Tuesday, September 14th, 1982. Section 1, page 19. I'm going to hold this up so you can see it. Here it is. And the title is The New Computer Tattoo. And it goes on to show that Senator Simpson, when he introduced his bill, Senator Alan Simpson, Republican from Wyoming, he stated that this illegal alien problem was only going to be a guise to issue a national identity card for each and every one of us, so that you cannot work in this country without a national identity card with barcodes on it with your name. Just like the one I'm holding in my hand with my name on it. Nothing but barcodes on it and my name. In the St. Louis County libraries right now. And this is what they want to issue to every legal American, and they're using illegal aliens pouring across our border as an excuse to introduce these bills. And the very last statement I thought was very interesting. He said, though this bill is aimed against undocumented workers, the computer tattoo will be pressed on you and me. The mark of the beast. So you see, this illegal alien problem has everything to do with the book of Revelation and the book of prophecy. And it's affecting you and me today. This is also used, these computer marks, for every single person who is registered in St. Louis University Hospital, which is a Catholic hospital in St. Louis. I was just there last week visiting 2 people in a car accident, and sure enough, every patient wore on their arm their barcode. So this is happening. Just like it said in Revelation 13, 16, and 17 in the New International Version, everyone small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, would have to receive a mark. They would be forced to receive it. You wouldn't go accept it, but it'll be forced upon you because of the usage of computers on his right hand or his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark. Now, there was an awful prophecy given in 1917. It was not a biblical prophecy, but it was a prophecy which foretold the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. The first ruthless dictator of communist Russia, Mr. V.I. Lenin, made the statement, I quote, "First we'll take Central Europe." That was fulfilled with the stroke of a pen when Winston Churchill, FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, and Stalin signed the Yalta Agreement or Accord after World War II. It enslaved 100 million people in all the countries of Central Europe. First step accomplished. Next, he said, we'll take the masses of Asia. China fell in 1949 and 50, and I've got the absolute documentation, which I'm going to print one of these days, showing that our own State Department and our ambassador to China were the ones who created, step by step, the subversion of that country. China. And they cut off all military aid to Chiang Kai-shek and gave it through the Soviet Union to Mao Zedong, when Chiang Kai-shek had nearly had all communists expelled out of China and run up into Manchuria. And our own State Department gave orders to cut off all supplies to him until he was chased on the little island of Formosa in Taiwan. There has been no nation in the world that has gone communist where the State Department of the United States hasn't been directly responsible for the overthrow of that government. Vietnam in the 1960s fell, along with Cambodia and Laos in the 70s. Then the third and final stage of their great plan, this is V.I. Lenin, he said, then we'll surround the United States, which will fall like an overripe grapefruit. End of quote. We see Cuba, 90 miles off of our shore. Nicaragua in Central America. Colombia in South America, which is now communist and sends their dope trade, their marijuana and so on, into the United States by the millions of tons every year. And now Mexico has fallen. I want to read you what Louis Tams, T-A-M-B, the United States ambassador to Costa Rica, said recently. Quote, unless the United States backs anti-communist rebels in Central America, those fighting communism, millions of refugees will be forced to flee across the United States border in search of jobs, food, and shelter. The question is, can we absorb tens of millions of people culturally, economically, and linguistically, because they speak Spanish, in a short period of time? What we have going on in Central America and the Caribbean today is an attack of subversion on what might be termed the soft underbelly of the United States. End of quote. Isn't that exactly what V.I. Lenin said in 1917? The last stage for world takeover was to come up under, surround the United States, and it will fall. And this ambassador has now stated that's what they're doing, coming up under the soft underbelly of the United States. But the question is, who is aiding the red takeover of Central America? I think that's very important. Who is aiding it? Who is the real enemy? According to the New York Times of May 18th, 1985, there were 263 delegates to a convention for the National Council of Churches in Chicago. They passed resolutions calling for churches in America to provide sanctuary for illegal refugees and communist agents from Latin America who oppose the United States aid to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters. Those were the ones who were to be given sanctuary in the United States, communist agents. The National Council of Churches in this country represents 32 Protestant, Anglican, and Orthodox denominations. And they actually have on their rolls 40 million church members. And yet, do the views of the National Council of Churches represent the political views of this 40 million people? No way whatsoever. Now, some of these churches, I'm only going to name a few of them, and I recommend that if anybody belongs to one of these churches, they get out now, because they are directly, through their contribution supporting international communism and the buildup of the beast power of Revelation chapter 13. Here's just a few of them. Well, I won't name them now. I've got the list at another time. But what I do want to say is that the World Council of Churches, the National Council of Churches in this country, is a member of the World Council of Churches, and the Soviet Union is also a member since 1961. And in this World Council of Churches, they have a program called the Program to Combat Racism, in which $4 million have been given to pro-Soviet and pro-Soviet control revolutionary groups in South Africa and Central and South America in the last couple of years. Direct donations from churches in the United States of America, because we fund 80% of the total amount of donations to that organization. Now, in addition, the National Council of Churches has very energetically lobbied for and propagandized and financed the Marxist liberation theology in South and Central America. And this is a movement that's literally woven subversion in Central America by using religion and communism hand in hand. I want to talk about this liberation theology, which is subverting Central and South America, for just a little bit. The use of religion to promote communism began in the United States in 1908, when a Mr. Harry Ward founded the Methodist Federation for Social Service. And he wrote the founding statement for the Federal Council of Churches, which changed its name because it began to receive bad press because it was known to have been socialist. And later it became known as the National Council of Churches. On the TV show 60 Minutes on January 23rd, 1983, Morley Safer stated, and he reported very clearly, that the Cuba Resource Center received support from the National Council of Churches. Cuba Resource Center. Now, what is this? This center used the funds to produce pro-Castro doctrines, redefining Christianity in Marxist communist terms. Liberation theology is what it was called. It's being widely promoted by the National Council of Churches, particularly in Latin America, the last bastion of freedom other than the United States in the Western Hemisphere. It uses traditional theological terms, religious-sounding terms, but changes their meaning. That's the way all communism does. They say, we want peace. But then they say we can't have peace till we have destroyed capitalism. So there is an ongoing war forever until every free country is subverted and becomes communist. Then there's peace because there is no opposition to them. The goal of the church, and here's their terms that they change. The goal of the church becomes the improvement of the physical well-being of people, particularly poor people. Jesus is portrayed as a revolutionary agitator seeking to overthrow the oppressive government authorities. This is liberation theology. Therefore, anyone who's seeking to overthrow existing authority is sanctified. You see? According to the liberation theology, sin is the oppression practiced by the government. And righteousness consists of activities that are aimed to overthrow the government. What a twist of the truth. It's also permissible to use violence in pursuit of this revolutionary goal, according to this theology, liberation theology. So liberation theology literally justifies and promotes violent revolution of governments, overthrows. And they prepare the way for an alliance with communists in every nation where liberation theology is preached. Here's what John F. McManus said in his syndicated column of November 19, 1984. Quote, "Boiled down to its essence, liberation theology is the reinterpretation of Christianity according to the concepts of Marxism. Those who follow its lead start with the ideology of Marx, so they take materialism, and then seek to reshape Holy Scripture to agree with Marx. Marx, of course, espoused materialism, which regards matter as the world's reality. He rejected all belief in anything spiritual, including God, life after death, and so on. Politically, the Marxian state he advocated is one where property rights and virtually all rights disappear in favor of an all-powerful central government." End of quote. Now, in an article that appeared in the Washington Times on January of 1984, Senator Jeremiah Denton, and he's one of the good guys who are left, he heads the Senate Subcommittee on Terrorism. He lashed out at this liberation theology. After conducting a series of hearings on the subject, Senator Denton concluded that liberation theologians have, and I quote, expropriated traditional Christian beliefs and doctrines, added a strong dose of Cuban-style Marxism to it, and produced an effective but camouflaged army of religious revolutionaries. End of quote. And then he went on to say that this liberation theology that's spreading means the gospel means establishing a messianic solidarity with the oppressed, the poor people of the world, and proving active resistance to all forms of class struggle. Take the poor and have a class struggle against the wealthy and the government. That's socialism, and that's exactly what liberation theology is. Now do you begin to see how the book of Revelation is exploding off the pages of the Bible? How this red beast is rising and it's using religion with it to overthrow governments. Here's what the Don Bell report of January 27, 1984 stated. He discussed this liberation theology. Quote, "Salvation is transformed into political liberation. Repentance becomes denunciation of the status quo. I repent of having a nice home. I repent of having a car. I'll help overthrow the government." See, that's repentance. And he says the Holy Spirit is replaced by the human spirit. The church becomes the world community. Conversion is translated into social action, where you convert the poor neighborhoods to a higher standard of living by taking from the wealthy, giving to the poor. It's just called a transfer of wealth from one to another instead of working for it. Nothing but pure Marxism and socialism. He says liberation theology is communism in Christian clothing. End of quote. So what is called liberation theology in South and Central America is really given another and softer name when it's talked about in the United States of America. Here's what it's called in America: process theology. And here's what a Catholic writer stated about it. Edith Myers, quote, "Process theology uses Christian terms, but it gives them different meanings. When it speaks of redemption, it does not mean that man is redeemed. It merely refers to a better temporal life for mankind. A good life today. There is no hereafter. Eternal life does not mean that man is called by God to an everlasting life. For process theology, eternal life means a quality of life here and now. Because Marxism say when you die, you're done, there is nothing else. You're like Rover, dead all over. Thus, supernatural concepts are changed to have purely natural meanings." End of quote. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of the whole matter. Who is really behind the overthrow of governments helping in Central and South America? There was a organization affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church, the Catholic Foreign Missionary Society of America. It was founded in 1911. It was known as the Mary Knoll Order. And it began as a very staunch anti-communist. And these people in Africa included heroic martyrs who died for their particular order. And also in China, Chinese communists killed many in this particular order who were against communism. Now, while there does remain today some who are loyal to the good objectives that started out in 1911 with this mission, most of those in the Mary Knoll Order today are priests, nuns, and brothers who have taken on and are now championing the communist revolution in Latin America. Now, I want to quote to you from a communist newspaper. This is the Daily World's editorial of December 18th, 1984. The communists publicly praise the Mary Knoll Order, and they actually delight over what the activities that they're engaged in Central and South America in aiding with the communists in the overthrow of dictatorships and democracies in South America. Here's what it states, quote, "In the last few years, the Mary Knoll missionaries have played a tremendous role in the struggle for human rights in Latin America." Every time you see the phrase human rights, it's from the United Nations organization. You know the United Nations organization is communist, and it is trying to overthrow that government for international world government and socialism. So here is the communist newspaper extolling the Mary Knolls for their struggle for human rights. Their steadfast and courageous activities in the fight for social progress should be an example for all progressive people. Everywhere you see progressive, like progressive education, progressive people, progressive culture, every single time it's international socialism, communism, trying to overthrow that government, because they even state in the protocols, their final 100-year program, that there is no such thing as progression of truth. Truth is there, it's permanent, it never changes. When you understand an absolute truth, it never changes, and yet they are constantly talking about progression, progressiveness, in order to change cultures and cause them to fall. I'll continue the quote. "There's a strong basis for unity among progressive forces throughout the nation and the progressive forces within the Catholic Church and the rest of the religious community." End of quote. So you see, the Communists and the Catholic Church, through the Mary Knoll Order, are working hand in hand for the overthrow of governments in Central and South America. Now, commenting on this particular activity in Central America, John F. McManus, in his column of May 9th, 1985, made this statement, quote, "Inasmuch as the Communists always use the term progressive to characterize themselves and their allies, what the Daily World is clearly saying is that some in the Mary Knoll Order are carrying the ball for communism." To understand what is meant when the editorial applauds the Mary Knoll Order for its role in the struggle for human rights or the fight for social progress, Realize that this is the same phraseology used to describe the efforts of Fidel Castro, the Nicaraguan Sandinistan communists, and various Kremlin officials. Marxist dictators who ravaged Africa, even the Soviet invaders of Afghanistan. So that's the same phrase they use in all of those operations. That should clearly tell us what they're doing through the Maryknoll Order in Central and South America. In 1969, Father Miguel de Escato took over the Maryknoll magazine. He also founded Orbis Books, the Maryknoll publishing arm. This order boasts that Orbis is the leading promoter of liberation theology in Central and South America. Orbis Books published, now this is a book, Communism in the Bible. That's a book. And it was by a Marxist Mexican professor, Jose Miranda. And this blasphemous book actually contains outrageous statements such as, I quote, Jesus was in fact a communist, end of quote. And that Christian anti-communism, quote, constitutes the great scandal of our century, end of quote. To try to create pressure on all Catholics in Central and South America to accept communism as true religion. He also preaches class hatred, just like Marxism, and that violence contradicts, he also contradicts church doctrine, and he undermines the Catholic Church's tradition in all of his publications. And he even insults the Pope, who is supposed to be head of all the religion in Central and South America. So you see, this man truly heads up this liberation theology. Now, Mr. McManus also pointed out in his previous column that I mentioned that Father de Escato for years used his prestigious position with the Maryknoll Order to discredit the anti-communist government in Nicaragua. When Nicaragua fell to the Sandinista communists, Father de Escato joined, quote, his communist friends and now serves as the foreign minister in the Red government, and a position he holds in defiance of papal orders, end of quote. Now do you see how this great church and also international red beast of communism are working hand in hand to fulfill Bible prophecy of Revelation chapter 17? And it's at our borders. At our borders. I've got so much documentation. I want to skip over just a little bit, but the communists have taken over Nicaragua in Central America. Here's what Phyllis Schlafly had to say in her report of August of 1985. Quote, the Sandinista dictatorship does what communist dictatorships also do. It created a secret police system to control the people, assisted by the Soviets, East Germans, and Cuban communists. It punishes freedom of speech, press, and assembly by officially sanctioned harassment, imprisonment, or death. Liberal friends of the Sandinistas have propagated the myth that they enjoy the popular support in Nicaragua of the people. The Sandinistas sustain their support by such methods as confiscating ration cards. They've given a ration card to every person in Nicaragua for food. And if you stand up and speak out against the government, they take your ration card. The only way you eat is to find food off the land, or you starve to death. And they confiscate ration cards for non-attendance at Sandinista communist meetings. Talk of inflation is branded as counter-revolutionary plots. End of quote. So the Sandinistas in Nicaragua have literally lined up thousands upon thousands of people and shot them dead right on the spot in order to reduce the population, according to the Global 2000 report, in half by the year 2000. Anyone who tries to escape into neighboring countries, the armed forces shoots them, and bodies by the thousand floats down the rivers and are dragged out of the river by other countries. This is a horrifying thing. But what you and I have to realize is that Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. Now, Mr. Ralph D. Toledano, in his syndicated column of September 19, 1985, he furnished additional information as what's going on in the Sandinista government. He said the Sandinistas, some 15 years before they overthrew Somoza in Nicaragua, were an integral part of global terrorists and their drive for world domination. They were actually armed and directed by the Soviet Union and its surrogate states, such as Bulgaria. In 1966, at the so-called Tricontinental Conference in Havana, Cuba, 500 delegates from Asia, Africa, and Latin America were brought together by Fidel Castro and the KGB, and they drew up a worldwide terrorist strategy right 90 miles off of our shores. And they actually taught them in these guerrilla camps how to blow up school buses in urban areas and how to use field tactics. And they had a curriculum also by the Soviet Union that taught them the use and maintenance of Soviet weapons such as rockets, shoulder-borne missiles, and techniques of car bombing, and how to paralyze citizen populations. And they've been using that in South Africa right now. He also concluded in his column by this, quote, "The Sandinistas have converted Nicaragua into an operation base for the German Baader-Meinhof gang, Italy's Red Brigades, and the Bastique ETA, the PLO, and other Latin American, African, and Arab and European terrorist organizations. So it is now the central place for the training of all of these types of terrorist organizations. To the delight of the Terrorist International, the Sandinistas have issued Nicaraguan passports to terrorists so they can travel freely on murderous missions." End of quote. And yet the United States government voted not to give aid to the freedom fighters in Nicaragua until finally speeches began to be made all over the United States by known communists who had come into this country. Finally, pressure was put on Congress, so they gave a pittance of support to the freedom fighters. And then they even said it could only be used for humane purposes and not for military operations. Well, I want to get into my two concluding sections now today, because I want you to understand what is really taking place. So that Paul says he doesn't want us to be ignorant on many things. Well, I don't want you to be ignorant of Bible prophecy, because it's going to affect every one of us. And our lives must be wrapped up in Jesus Christ in order to avoid these things that are going to take place. But the Soviet Union are the ones who are literally building up the war machine in Central and South America. On May 20th, 1985, Sandinista director, this is a Cuban director, or the communist director, Daniel Ortega, announced that the Soviet Union had agreed to supply 80 to 90% of all the oil that it needed for that year so that they could carry on their activities. Also, they promised to provide all raw materials, consumer goods, and food to stabilize their government until they could produce for themselves. Now, the Phyllis Schlafly report of August 1985 went on providing information by eyewitnesses who escaped from that country, testifying before a group of military and intelligence experts that collaborated under the name National Committee to Restore Internal Security. And with this organization, they heard testimony how that the Nicaraguans based all over Central America are building up dramatically military equipment for the invasion of the United States of America. They said that there's right now over 3,000 Cuban military advisors, and they're all, and even down to the infantry level in Nicaragua right now. And one out of every people in Nicaragua is a soldier. And they have over 9,000 Cubans as just advisors and military people, in addition to their advisors in Nicaragua right now. And in 1983, the Soviet bloc delivered $100 million in military hardware to Nicaragua. So it's not just the Russians and the Cubans, but there's others also who have sent advisors to the Sandinistas. They've had foreign advisors from countries such as Communist Vietnamese, North Koreans, Bulgarians, East Germans, and even the Arabs, PLO. Arafat and his organization, have all been sending in all of this type of military equipment. So it definitely is the Soviet Union that's building this up. Now, I want to skip down to what a Dr. McBurney said in a publication that he put out, and it was called The Lull Before the Storm. On page 6 of that, I just want to quote one little paragraph. The foundation for a communist takeover and a virtual flood of innocent blood is already in position in Mexico. Thousands of Soviet agents, including native Mexicans trained inside Russia, have infiltrated every political movement in the country. Most Mexican teachers are members of the Communist Party. Mexico is loaded with more communist intellectuals, agitators, and specialized guerrillas than any other country outside the Soviet Union. End of quote. That verifies everything that I was told by the Mr. Gonzalez, who was the head, Arturo Gonzalez, who headed up the Inter-American advertising agency that put our radio program on XERF in Mexico. Now, I want to show, in this final segment, actual bills before the Congress of the United States right now. They are already in committee, which would actually allow millions upon millions of illegal aliens. It will legalize their coming into the United States up to 200 miles and displacing thousands upon thousands of jobs. I hold up before you now a letter that I received from House of Representative Harry Gonzalez of the 20th District in Texas. Mr. Gonzalez, here's what he says. Pursuant to your call to my Washington, D.C. office, I'm enclosing a copy of House of Representative Bill 593. My bill is to establish a United States-Mexico Joint Development Bank. I'm enclosing a fact sheet on the bill. Here's the fact sheet. It's sort of a summary of the whole bill. And this literally states the problem is there is not enough jobs in Mexico. They need to create up to 400,000 jobs a year in Mexico because of the exploding population. Otherwise, the people are going to pour into the United States and take jobs from this country. And so they want to formulate a bill, a bank that's jointly owned by the United States and Mexico. One of the bank offices will be located in San Antonio, Texas, and the other one inside of Mexico. And this would be an independent bank, and all profits, however long the bank lasted, would be equally shared by Mexico and the United States. And the zone would be a 200-mile border zone of Mexico and extend into the United States. And here's the bill itself, H.R. 593. And they state, It is the sense of Congress that the continuing flow of undocumented nationals from Mexico into the United States is a critical economic and political problem for both countries and a detriment to relations between the two nations. There is a continuing and urgent need for economic development within the United States border region. Why? In order to supply foreigners with jobs. And it goes through the whole bill, showing that the bank may enter into agreements with public international organizations, and so on. And it says that it would share technical assistance with foreign nations such as Mexico. Our technical assistance, giving it to a communist country. Is there a threat to the United States? Oh, yes. And right here in this bill, it states very clearly that one of the bank offices will be in San Antonio, Texas, in the United States. Now, do you realize why WOAI gets so excited when I preach these things on their station? And they call me wanting to know exactly where I get this information? Is it a threat to their security? Are they going to lose their national rights in the United States? I want to show you the big bill now, and this is the one that's going to destroy the southwest part of the United States. It's House of Representative Bill number 3199. I'll just read you what it's for. It would provide for the establishment of a United States-Mexico free trade and co-production zone, a United States-Mexico bilateral commission, a multilateral commission on immigration. Why do we need anything to do with immigration? Nobody's going to Mexico. It's communists. The only people coming immigrating would be from Mexico to the United States. That's why they want a co-production zone in the United States to allow their citizens to come 200 miles up into our borders. And it states right here on the very first page of this bill that this will be cited from now on in this bill as the United States-Mexico Border Revitalization Act. I only want to give 2 quotes from it, or a couple of quotes. They said that the United States or the President was authorized to negotiate an agreement with the government of Mexico for the establishment of a free trade and co-production zone 200 miles into each country's territory. 200 miles into our country. Free trade. It also says increase the transfer of technology. That means all of our secrets going to foreigners to compete for our products in this country. And it goes on and gives this entire bill, 31 pages long, would literally devastate the southwestern part of the United States of America. Now, I want to also hold up for you an intelligence report that I've received, fully documented, 34 pages, and it's entitled Intelligence Report on Secret Soviet-Mexican Preparation for Red Dawn Attack upon the United States. And it documents in here where the country of Mexico since 1974, and it gives newspaper article after newspaper article to prove this. They have built 1,100 landing strips within 100 miles of the United States border. Some of them so large that it could land the most sophisticated carriers of heavy hardware, huge transport airplanes and jets, bombers, fighter jets of the Soviet Union. All of this is documented right here in this report. I'm telling you, Bible prophecy is here. You and I, as followers of Jesus Christ, must so enwrap our lives with Him, we must hit our knees in prayer to give us the strength. Because when the years ahead take place, and the prophecies, and when they come into the United States, this world government is set up, all of our property is confiscated. Everything you've worked for a lifetime will be gone. And when they institute these barcodes and tell you that you can't buy or sell without it, your only hope of survival is Jesus Christ. That is your only hope. So I hope that you and I, brethren, can be so engulfed in Jesus that nothing will take us away. I want to just read 2 verses now in closing. Revelation 19, verse 9 and 10, because this is after this beast system is in force. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. Brethren, you and I, under no circumstance, want to participate in this end-time beast system and accept its head, the beast leader, the Antichrist, as God and the Messiah.